So Ian, let's now move on to the 1-3-5-2 attacking versus the 1-4-5-1 defending. And my first question to you as the attacking team is regarding your striker, your solitary striker up front playing against my three defenders. And in my thinking, you're going to be conceding possession to us, certainly if we move the ball between our number 3, our number 4 and our number 5 with only one player up front. So are you willing, one, to concede possession? And if you're not willing to concede possession, are you going to sacrifice some space by moving your midfielders up?
It's a good question, because I think it's a natural concern of a 1-4-5-1. So my broad answer is it's situational. If we look at this as the first 5-10 minutes of the game, the way I've set up is we're going to be conservative. So my 9 is not going to chase. He or she's going to stay high and just be their outlet. And then my back 4 is nicely connected, so no problems there. In this particular case where your number 3 has the ball, I've got 7 confronting. I've got 8, 6, and 10 around, and my number 11 is pinched in. So I'm very comfortable giving you some possession out there because I don't feel a great threat with my good numbers. And then I've got wonderful space to counter into that is behind you if I can get support to my 9. Now, the situational element comes up is if we are, we've deemed that your team is particularly weak in, let's say, this position. So this is a player maybe we can exploit and steal the ball from, or we're indeed losing 1-0 or 2-0. So now I'm going to need this number 9 to be higher and engaged in doing some defending. But he or she can only do that if the entire block of players, that's the midfield 5, and then as they push, my back 4 all engage. So I believe that I can chase the game in this formation, but certainly early on, I can let you carry the game, put the work effort in to try to possess and break me down, and then I'll counter. So I've got a couple of different options, and they all really relate to situation and personal preference. To you, I'd like to ask the question, if you're only going to play with 3 in the back and 5 across the midfield, I clearly will have tandems of players in the flanks, my 2 and my 7, and my 3 and my 11. And that will be pretty constant in the 4-5-1. So how do you propose to threaten this system or this formation, given you only have 1 wide player against 2 opposed on my team?
Well, I think the response is relatively simple, Ian, and that is that why would we try to penetrate wide when you certainly have a distinct advantage? The 11 and the 3 playing against the 7, certainly 2-1, and equally on the other side, the 2 and the 7 playing against the 11. So I think what we would be looking to do would be playing inside, playing wider than the center, but certainly inside the 2 and the 7 and the 3 and the 11. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about getting too much width. With that said, if width an opportunity is to get width, and so let's say your number 11 has played a little higher and left space between the 3 and the 11, certainly the opportunity to get my number 7 into that higher space would be something I'd be looking to exploit. But certainly looking at this with you having more players in the wide positions, I would clearly try to avoid playing to your strength.
Okay, excellent.
So let's go to the 1-4-5-1 attacking against the 1-3-5-2 defending. And your question for me?
So it's really now just flipping that, and that's the question now becomes is it's all very well for you determining where you want the ball to be played when you've got it, but in my case, I'm going to ask my 3 and 11 and my 7 and 2 to try to get into wide spaces in possession, because you only have 2 designated wide players, 1 on each flank. So how are you going to prevent my attacking overloads in the wide positions?
Yeah, and I think you've used the phrase before about the poor man's blanket, essentially meaning that we can't cover everything. And in this case is a good example. We cannot cover the center of the field and the width of the field when we've set ourselves up, certainly with the 3 at the back, the 2 up front and 3 central midfield players to certainly put the majority of our players between the width of the box. And so with that in mind, I would certainly be willing to give up width to you, but not central space. So that's the way we've set up. Certainly when you get into that last third of the field, now possession becomes a little bit more important for us. So we will start to move our wider players, our 7 and 11, into those areas to put some level of pressure on. But when the ball is in the first 2/3 of the field, I think we will be more conscious of cutting off any supply inside the field and not outside. So to you, Ian, your question, how does the 1-4-5-1 take advantage of the apparent vulnerability we have in wide space and in high positions with only 1 striker versus our 3 defenders and a 5v5 in midfield?
Yeah, so my answer to that is that I'm going to keep this number 9, my striker, when we're in possession over here, really trying to engage your 3 centre backs. So there's one of them, there's one of them, and now you've had this one come outside. So I've already started to push your team around because you've determined you can either play 3 marking my number 9, or you have to sacrifice 1 outside to help. Now you've got the right numerical situation in the center. You've lost a center back outside. This space becomes a space I'm interested in attacking. This space becomes one I'm interested in attacking if I could switch the point of attack. So I think a back 3 is pretty good against a front 2, but I actually think that my lone striker creates a real challenge for your team, which is and it will force it to become almost asymmetrical, if you will. So that's my approach to it, is to get your guys out of their comfort zone and having to shift.
Now let's look at the 1-4-4-2 attacking versus the 1-4-5-1. And my question to you, Ian, is with your 1-4-5-1, you on paper match up reasonably well against us in midfield, but given the narrow nature of the 4 central midfield players, we actually have a 4 versus 3 advantage and 2 central strikers as well. So how would you address that matchup from a defensive perspective?
Yeah, so my answer is I'm not concerned about this player. If you're playing with a diamond in midfield, I think from a possession point of view, your number 6 is relatively of no threat to us because I think you've designated him as a deep line defensive player. However, if he or she should become a problem in terms of becoming a fulcrum for, let's say, swinging the ball from side to side, then my solution to that would be is just to ask my number 9 to come down in front of them. So out of possession, if we think your extra player in midfield is a problem, my number 9 is just going to come and stand in front, just to simply deny them the ability to play. And then as soon as we win it, my number 9 is going to pop back the short distance up into the center. So I'm not going to be worried about your number 6. And if there was any threat of the number 6, my number 9 can negate it just by moving 5-10 yards and just standing in a hole. That's my idea. Over to you. And I think I can start to predict your answer because you're going to maintain your diamond. But whether it's diamond or not, I feel like I've got a really good threat to you of 3 in the center midfield. So how do you deal with my 3 central midfielders potentially outnumbering your midfield, given that I've got 5 across my midfield and you've only got 4?
Well, as you were trying to predict, you could see I was drawing a triangle on the screen to represent your 3 central players, your 6, your 8, your 10. And given that I drew these diagrams, I have demonstrated quite clearly here how the triangle of your defense is no match to my my diamond of my central players. So as you can see here, I have drawn the players moving in and around the outside of your triangle, but not so far as to engage your wide players. So certainly that would be the strategy of playing around the 3 players you have with our 4 players, but not to get so far that we start drawing in the 11 and the 7.
Fair enough.
And Ian, let's go to the 1-4-5-1 against the 1-4-4-2, now reversing with the 1-4-4-2 defending.
Yep. So how will your 4-4-2 defend the width in midfield against my 7 and 11 without leaving space between defenders for penetrating runs from deep? So as I pull your diamond apart because of my width, how do you cover up all of the holes that I will be creating because of the imposition of width?
I think the key here, Ian, is that the diamond cannot be pulled apart. Otherwise, we sacrifice the whole focus and the objective of keeping the diamond narrow in midfield anyway. So this is where the number 9s have to be conditioned to track back and to provide wide support. And whether that's against the number 3 or whether that's the number 11, they have to be able to provide that level of support. The good news is that we would be able to push on the number 2 forward and the number 3 forward, given that you only have one up top anyway. I'm assuming my number 4 and 5 will be able to handle your 1 reasonably well. So that's the way, certainly. But that is the vulnerability of the diamond in midfield, is that width in midfield, and that has to be accounted for by the number 9s. And to you, Ian,
I will add, though, if I was playing in your system of 4-4-2, I wouldn't really enjoy being a number 9 because I keep getting pulled back into wide defensive positions and not allowed to attack so much. So, but maybe we can come to that in the conclusion.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree, but remember, this was Paul Marco's diamond. So let's now move on to the question I have for you, and that's how are you going to retain possession high, so in your attacking area, with only 1 versus 4 disadvantage?
It's a fair question, and I think one that people could reasonably ask. A lot of it's going to depend on the qualities of my number 9. So if my number 9 can hold up the ball, can maintain possession, shield it, protect it, has the size, then other players can come and support. The next place I'd be looking to, if we feel that number 9 can't retain possession for long periods of time, then he or she's going to need to get some very immediate support. And I'm going to expect my 7 and 11 and my number 10 to be the first 3 players released by the 2 fullbacks and the number 8 and the number 6 to let those players get support. So I think it can be done. I think it'd be done by the special qualities of the number 9 and or the willingness of immediate and aggressive support from at least 7, 11, and 10. And then finally, if I really felt that this was a struggle, I would simply put the ball in behind the opponent, turn the opponent around, and then at least allow my team to determine where it sets up its pressure pockets. So in the worst case scenario, where we're maybe running out a little bit of gas and number 9's isolated, we'll turn the opponent around, make them recover, and then find out where we can set up a restraining line to potentially win the ball back.
Ian, before we go to this final concluding slide, one thought here is, certainly the time that goes into preparing answers for these different scenarios isn't something that happens necessarily off the cuff. Have you got any thoughts on how you might work with a team of coaches within your club to work through these type of scenarios that they may encounter?
Yeah, I think most of us can probably appreciate having sat at a coffee shop or somewhere and taken out some sugar packets and sort of moved them around and suggested how different lineups can oppose. I know Paul Marco likes to bring out a Subbuteo set and get little mannequins of players moving around. So I do think it's good to be able to diagram these. Sometimes animations can help, sometimes some different use of technology, but sometimes it can be simple as just moving around, like I said, sugar packets or coins. And I think the key is that the evolution of the game, the evolution of tactics, formations, and systems is such that there is no silver bullet. So again, as we come to this concluding slide, it's a little bit horses for courses. It's being up to date, being flexible. But key is that the players, when you ask the players to do something, they've had some experience of doing it in training. A lot of coaches I see like to present themselves as tactical geniuses, yelling and barking different pieces of information across the field. And the natural response of the players is sort of to scratch their heads because they've never seen or heard these situations before. So it's the responsibility of the coach in training to demonstrate the tactical flexibility of the team as it relates to formations and systems.
Well, thank you very much, Ian Barker, for your time, and thank you to Paul Marco for his presentation on the 1442. This concludes the series where we looked at 4 formations, and each presenter gave their interpretation of that formation and system. And frankly, that is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to that kind of discussion. There's so much more depth we could get into and debate back and forth. So hopefully, coaches, you've enjoyed this series. There's been enough here to inspire your thinking, and now to take this back with your clubs and your teams, and to really get into the very deep discussions that go on when it relates to formations and systems. Thanks, Ian. Any final thoughts from you?
No, obviously this last session has been somewhat tongue-in-cheek. David and I have had some fun with it. But I think the content here on the concluding slide, some good prompts for you to think about it. And hopefully you've enjoyed it. And again, as David said, inspired you to go out and look more critically and thoughtfully at your teams and your opponents.
Thank you.